It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that is just so damn happy to return a familiar voice. I'm Christy Powell, and I'm ecstatic to say that my co-host tonight is Miss Serafina Smith.
Hi, everybody. Welcome.
And our guest tonight is a speech-language pathologist specializing in gender-affirming voice therapy. Welcome to Tallulah Breslin.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, tonight we are talking all about the voice, and you all know the favorite voice that we like to hear from everyone is yours. So if you could give us a call at 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex, because this show is starting right now.
All right, let's do it. Tallulah, we did an episode a while back with friend of the show, Billy Beard, who honestly just really fucked with my head when she talked to us about vocal therapies and explained that human vocal folds, everybody from like Brad Garrett to Yeardley Smith, have a fold that is only between like 1.5 to 2.5 centimeters long. All of that like variety and diversity in the way that we communicate can really come down to something incredibly tiny and seemingly insignificant. Do I really have it right in all of that?
Our vocal folds are the size of a dime or smaller, but our voice comes from our whole instrument, which is our torso, our voice box, and all the way to our lips. So we do have a big instrument.
Yeah, what are some of the other pieces, or what does all of that encompass?
So our breath drives our voice, and then we have our larynx that our sound comes from, and then we have our instrument, which is our voice box, our throat, our nasal cavity, our mouth, and our lips all combined together to make the sound that we hear.
Yeah, so you've got all of these different pieces, ideally working in harmony, or at least in their kind of own unique eclectic blend. One of my crusades on this show, if we can call it that, has maybe been to help people realize just how subjective their experience of other people really can be. Can you walk us through some of the obvious and maybe less obvious impacts that our voice has on others and how other people see us?
Sure. Our voice has a very big impact on how people hear us. Some of the things that are more obvious are our accent, are where we came from, and some that like our emotion, our educational background. We know those type of things, but we can also have a lot of impact with our choice on how we use our voice. So if we have a really sweet voice, we have a lot of thyroid tilt, then people will want to hear what we have to say, lots of intonation, versus if we're very monotone and very vertical, then our voice will may not even listen to what we have to say. There's a lot we can do to influence people.
Yeah, what are some of the implications then? Obviously your voice is going to impact, I suppose, the way people see you. So that's going to come into play at your job, at maybe your romantic relationships or your peer relationships. Walk us through a little bit, I guess, just how sweeping some of this can be.
Okay, they asked me to move my mic closer, so I'm trying to do that.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I think so. I like to think of it that we all have the same pieces and parts to our voice, and we can use them differently. We also want to have a voice that matches us. So our vocal folds, right, like they vibrate. If we make them very thin and just touch a little bit, it's called stiff. And both Michael Jackson and Marilyn Monroe talk using that voice recipe. And in Michael Jackson, he did it to protect his vocal folds, and it makes us a little uncomfortable because it doesn't match what he looks like. And so maybe I wouldn't want to date Michael Jackson, but Marilyn Monroe has that voice recipe work for her. So, right? Like, happy birthday, Mr. President. I may like that voice a little bit better.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue when you think about the impact of gender and expectation and, some of the maybe assumptions that people make rightly or wrongly, for better or for worse, about how people are supposed to sound. What kinds of assumptions do people tend to base on our voice or on the way that we express ourselves?
Well, there's so much that our voice communicates that people make a lot of assumptions based on it. There's research that's really old from Stanford, I think back in the 70s, that shows that over 95% of the message that people hears from us is from our voice rather than from our words. So people will tend to assume how we're feeling. So if I'm using a really rapid voice and I'm talking really fast and maybe I'm stumbling a little bit, you may think that maybe I'm a little bit anxious. Or if I'm talking really slow and maybe I need to think a little bit, you might not think I'm smart. Or if I have a more monotone, what's coded as masculine pitch pattern in our culture, and right, Hillary Clinton has a very feminine sounding voice, but she has a tendency to talk more like this, then we'll hear more power and authority in her voice. There's a lot that we can do to influence people.
Recently, I was looking at TikTok, which I'm outing myself as a TikToker now, but they were talking about flirting for women with other women, and how women tend to not recognize that you're being flirted with by another woman, and so the advice being given was to not speak in the higher register when you're doing it, like, hey, you're really pretty, but to take it down to a more in-depth vision, say, hey, you're really pretty, and just the difference that can be heard there.
No, that's actually really interesting. As a male presenting person who largely dates women, I have had maybe the opposite experience, or maybe I should say that oftentimes having a lot of women as friends and these different things, when I would make a comment like that and be very careful not to have it come across as flirty, I do find myself maybe raising like the pitch of my voice and maybe saying it a little bit softer, like, oh, you look really nice today. Comes across a little bit differently. Are we at all in the right ballpark, Tallulah? I mean, does this line up with maybe how you would coach people in these categories?
I know that there is a recent study that came out that found that people who use masculine voices, who have lower pitched, darker voices down in here, are more likely to sleep with more partners and be less likely to stay with just one partner.
Well, there you go. Yeah, however you want to interpret that. Whatever any of you want to do with that information, that feels like a superpower here. And I feel like it's important to remember. I know we've said it, and it's perhaps not that complex of an idea, but I don't know how many times we can say it before it becomes saying it too many. People don't live their lives as if this is true. I think we all recognize, and I don't think anybody listening is necessarily like shocked by this conversation, but as a therapist, particularly working around experiential work and helping people to get in touch with their nervous systems. We've talked on this show before about polyvagal theory and some of these other ideas around interpersonal neurobiology and just how people connect and communicate. I don't think I can say too many times how important it is to become aware of how your tone of voice, your diction, the rate of your speech, how all of these things communicate so much to the person that you're speaking to. And we don't necessarily prioritize it in this culture as much as I think we maybe should. Has that been y'all's experience?
So prior to COVID, I worked for 5 years in nursing homes, and I never had a good concept of how to modulate my voice. And so I had a job as a speech language pathologist where I would need to have other people help me help other people. And so I might say, hey, James, this is really urgent. You need to do this thing right now. And they wouldn't necessarily do it. And I've since learned, since I started exploring my voice, that if I were to say, hey, James, Mr. So-and-so really needs your help with this right now, it would be more likely that they would help and they wouldn't have that like instantaneous resistance to my tone.
Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, and people are, whether consciously or unconsciously, making all of these judgments about how we present and whether or not we're worth listening to or whatever else, what sorts of discrimination is experienced by folks who have the wrong voice, or maybe a voice that doesn't line up with our expectations or our assumptions about what it should be?
Well, the other end of discrimination would be the things that happen to people who do take control of their voice. Eating College in the UK teaches people how to do a lot with their voice, and you look at their politicians and the people in charge in their country, and over 50% of the people have been educated there. We used to think that all of these different skills for communication were the great equalizer, that everyone should know how to debate, but they've kind of been lost. And so when we don't learn how to use our words to communicate with intention and leave it up to sort of how we feel and let that feeling communicate for us, and we don't always have the same impact that we could if we had more control and awareness over it.
I think that is such a significant point. I almost wish I could just ask you to say it right over again. To respond to something that came up in the chat, it may seem like the stuff we're talking about is this sort of like pickup artistry manipulation type of thing. And I think it's worth recognizing that, yeah, you can use your voice to manipulate people, because yeah, you can use your voice to manipulate people, but taking an active and intentional control of how you present yourself is not an inherently disingenuous or manipulative practice. It's just being mindful in the way that you are heard and understood by other people. I mean, has that been y'all's experience?
I also think that it's kind to be in control of our voice. So if people feel the way that we communicate feeling to them, and we had a bad day or something bad happened and they then feel bad, whereas if we know how to communicate and help people feel positively when they hear our words, then we're gifting our voice instead of sort of just dumping on them, and that's powerful. It doesn't have to be manipulative. It just can be that we choose for you to feel good when we talk to you.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. Now, I'll say, as somebody who has a quote unquote girl's name, and who I used to work on the phone for a number of years, even though the word Christy is not difficult to spell or to hear or to enunciate, people would constantly ask me, wait, what was your name? But okay, so how do you spell that? Mostly out of fear that they would accidentally call me by a girl's name, which would be incredibly offensive, of course. You would never want to accuse a man of being a girl. That would be, terrible. But because of that, people were often made a little bit uncomfortable or kind of surprised because of that mismatch. And I say that as a very privileged, able-bodied white guy. I'm curious what kind of discrimination is experienced by folks who don't have the voice that they're, quote, supposed to, or that society maybe tells them that they're meant to have.
There's a lot of different situations where people's voice is discongruent with what people might expect. I know sometimes people who are neurodivergent or on the autism spectrum will be assigned male at birth, but will have a really high-pitched voice, and that might not match. And then someone might question whether or not they're a girl, or they might face discrimination because of that. I think a really big area with discrimination that I come across are people who present as one gender, but their voice gets coded as another gender, and that can lead to a lot of different problems. It can lead to poor customer service or job discrimination, or unfortunately even harm. Black trans women in particular are at risk of experiencing harm when they get clocked.
No, I definitely hear that. Maybe outside of the perceptions of other people, what kind of experiences do people have intrapersonally, or when they hear their own voice? Does that create a sense of dysphoria oftentimes, or what can you maybe tell us about the way people experience their own voice in these sometimes tricky or uncomfortable ways?
Vocal dysphoria is very common with the individuals that I help with their voices. I think it is, right, like communication is so incredibly important. And when the sound of our own voice makes us feel uncomfortable, dysphoria is very uncomfortable to experience. We are less likely to want to talk. We might isolate. We might just try to speak as little as possible, not answer questions in class, and it ends up being isolating overall. And the more we become comfortable with our voice, the more that it reflects the voice that we want to hear, the more that we're willing to use it. And communication is so vital to all of our interactions that it's really awesome when we're more confident using our voice.
Well, no question. Here in just a moment, I'm going to give Sarah a chance to bring up our first caller. But while she's getting that ready, I'm assuming because of the work that you do, that you can talk to us at least a little bit about what the intentional training of your voice, or what taking some of these things on and working through some of the coaching that you offer and all of these different strategies can do. How can we change some of these outcomes for ourselves?
That is a very big question.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I think that there's a lot we can do. I think the very first step to start at if we want to change our voice is to make sure that our voice is healthy. I think that if we stay well hydrated, we avoid smoking. Smoking is very, very bad for your voice. It can be smoking anything, vaping as well. So we can try to cut down on smoking. A lot of times for HRT, we need to stop smoking anyways, or for gender reassignment surgeries, doctors will ask us to stop. Then we can try to control reflux. Mucus a lot of times can bother voices. Anything that is irritating, if we can get that under control, that'll get us ready to start practicing. It was a very big question, though. So if you want to start, maybe we should start there.
I definitely hear that that there's a lot that goes into the process. I guess I more meant to ask. Are we able to change these outcomes? I mean, the work that you do, becoming more aware of everything from hydration to blowing our nose to some of the exercises that I'm sure you work with people on. How does that potentially change the way other people experience them? Or what's the best case scenario for perhaps somebody who wants to work with you?
So what happens after you do the work is that your voice is congruent with the voice recipe that you want. We all have the same pieces and parts to our voice. We all have a current voice recipe. So every different variable, the voice is the voice that we want, or the voice that we hear in our head has just a different set of setup for those variables. And when we learn, there's a process, right? You learn what the variables are and how to produce the different range. And then once you do that, you're able to hear, okay, what way do I want that, right? Like, would I prefer to have my larynx in a really low position, in a mid position, or in a really high position? And then once you can produce each variable, then you can start being able to get consistent, listen back to your recording and that sound the same every time. Then work on the feeling. How does it feel to have my larynx at a particular height? And then you're able to generalize that feeling to everyday speech until it just becomes part of your voice recipe. We know that you can change these things because you're literally already using them. We just use them differently.
Yeah, it's honestly really remarkable to see you kind of switch gears and move back and forth in those ways. I'm sure that is a skill that you've honed for a really long time, but from the outside, it's to me like watching somebody blow bubble gum or curl their tongue, or these like other things that just feel so completely outside of my understanding of how to like navigate or manipulate a body. Yeah, okay, thanks, Sarah. For the podcast audience, Sarah's a jerk. Who can curl her tongue, and I cannot. But if you're done being mean to me, Sarah, why don't you take us to the phones to get us started there?
I don't know if I am done being mean to you, Christy.
Okay, fair enough.
But I will take us to the phones. We have a call from Fiona in Texas. Hey, Fiona. Can you hear us?
Hi.
Hi, Fiona. It's nice to talk to you.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you too.
What do you got for us today?
Hi, so I'm a trans woman and I started transitioning, or at least taking hormones, rather recently. but I ran into the problem of being misgendered in public. And I was wondering, is there like a correct way, or at least a more safe way to like correct them?
I'll just mention very briefly that I like what you said there about, I don't know that there is a correct way or a right way of doing it. I think that, being mindful of your surroundings and your, just your energy at the time. Is this something that you want to pursue? Is this something that you have the spoons for? I don't know that you have an obligation to correct people, but I certainly would hope that you would have the opportunity to more often than not. What kinds of recommendations would y'all maybe have for how to do that?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, for me, it's always a matter of just, is this worth it? Because, there's the feeling of being misgendered, and that sucks. But at the same time, there's also, I'm on my way to work, or, I'm just trying to get through my day. And, my usual way of doing that is just like a quick, like if someone says he, I'll just quick she or her or something like that. Just as a quick speaking up that doesn't interrupt the flow of conversation so much, but it's enough to be there so that if they are willing to pay attention, that they will understand that they've been misgendering me. But if I'm like, out in public, and there's just some, asshole being mean, I'm just going to walk on, because they're not acting in good faith in any case. So they're not going to respond to correction in a positive way,
Yeah, I think that that's critical here, that you are not under any obligation, not to other trans folks, not to society at large, not even to yourself, to correct somebody or to put yourself potentially even in danger, or honestly, even to just feel hassled. Like, you don't need to correct anybody. But I would hope that more often than not that you would feel empowered to do so. And usually the best way to do that might be through something fairly like quick and subtle, so as not to turn it into like this big argumentative clash of whether or not this is right or okay, and just say very simply and plainly, like, oh, that was a mistake. Oh no, actually, or actually, in point of fact, or just so you know. So that if people do decide to be jerks about it, you haven't like created this antagonistic atmosphere, and they get to be the asshole, and you get to kind of walk away from it should the conversation go that way, which, of course, I'd like to believe that we're building a world where that type of reaction is less and less common. Certainly there is more than enough working its way through state legislatures and through the culture war right now to cast doubt on that hope. But in the long run, I'd like to think that this is going to continue to get easier.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that there shouldn't be no obligation to correct people if they misgender you. If you are misgendered and you want to, there are options. I know one of the situations that comes up sometimes is in the bathroom. We've been having a lot of conversations about what to say if you're misgendered in the bathroom, and I think my favorite at the moment is "I know," and then keep going. And then, right, like, just if it, you kind of have to judge each situation independent. Is this somebody who you're never going to see again, and it maybe made you feel uncomfortable, but it would be easier for you personally to move on? Or could you say, please use she, her pronouns? Or actually, I use she, her pronouns. Excuse me, could you use she, her pronouns, please? Or you could say, I'm Fiona. Please use she, her pronouns, whatever it is that is comfortable for you. But you do have a right to be called by the words and pronouns and gendered language that you use. And it is never an obligation to correct someone, but it is something that is okay to do as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think public bathrooms are something I avoid now until I feel more comfortable because it's confusing. And so I typically just wait till I get home.
Yeah, that's very fair to say. And I know that this is not new information to you, Fiona, or really to any trans folks, particularly, well, really any trans folks that are listening. But I guess I just really, really, really want to reiterate this to the rest of the audience. This is such a common experience. And you might think of it as not that big of a deal. Like you just hold it a little bit longer. You just hold it until you get home. But this is something that is causing so many unnecessary medical complications, not to mention just outright fear and terror among so many people who are already marginalized. And I know that it feels very silly that our country has had this like 5-year long national debate about where trans people are supposed to pee. It feels very silly in a lot of ways, but it's fucking important. And I hope that everybody who is listening to this is mindful and doing what they can do to help change this narrative and to help change this situation. Fiona, I really appreciate you giving us a call tonight, and I hope that we've been able to offer some sort of support for somebody who is just trying to exist in a world that is not especially kind.
Yeah, thank you all. Also thank you, Tallulah, for offering advice with like voice and helping transgender people especially.
Yeah, of course. I do want to add that there is a much higher risk of UTIs among the trans population, and I think the lack of access to the bathrooms or the avoidance because people aren't sure is a big contributor to that. And so it does need to be resolved so that everyone has access to bathrooms. It's like a basic human right is bathroom access.
It really is.
Thank you, Fiona. We really appreciate your call. Is there anything else you needed to ask?
No, that's all I had. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
All right, Sarah, you want to try to sneak in one more before we jump back into the interview?
I think we can get one in. We've got Linda from Florida on the line here.
All right.
Linda, hello. How are you doing?
Good evening. I'm doing pretty well. And I wanted to say something to the different voice recipes, which Tallulah mentioned before, because I also have this as my normal voice, or I can have this as my higher voice. So whatever you want me to talk with, I can talk like this. So this is my normal daily voice, and this is my demo voice to make people look funny. I am not trans. I'm intersex. And also what Fiona said before, the bathroom issues are also very much for intersex people because we sometimes look different when we actually have chromosomes. I happen to have XX chromosomes, and I was a man, and so until I was able to change again, I had the same bathroom issues. So I don't know how to say that. I don't really know where you guys are, because the TV picture is totally different of what I hear on the telephone. So I don't know what else to say because I don't know where we are. I compliment you guys for doing this, and I hope if it changed a few minds, it's a good thing. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Well, thank you so
Linda.
much.
We
Linda had
appreciate
some
your
good
call.
voice recipes there.
Uh-huh. Well, I suppose we can take a few minutes then to talk about those different recipes, right? And to get a little bit deeper, Tallulah, into the work that you do. I know a lot of us are, somewhat aware of the idea of having like a phone voice or a customer service voice. But, in getting ready for this show, you kind of hinted at the idea that gender expression and other techniques go really beyond that. What can you teach us here?
So I'd love to explain my framework that I use, that sort of all of the voice work that I do falls under. I sent y'all a graphic. I don't know if you have it to throw up, but basically, there you go. Okay, I drew this earlier today. So our voice starts with our breath, right? So we have our diaphragm is the pink piece. That's this huge muscle. We have all of this power. And remember, our vocal folds are tiny. They're like a dime or less. So we're driving all of this breath through our instrument, our lung, and we're able to talk with that breath. The blue part is our larynx or our voice box. And there are a lot of different moving parts in there that work together to make the sound that we hear. Our sound doesn't necessarily sound very nice until it goes through our filter, but there are a lot of different ways that we can shift it. We can that bottom, there's a few cartilages into our voice. That bottom piece can make us belt, right? If we have a New York accent, hey, how you doing? It sounds a little bit fun for masculine voice to try belting. Our thyroid cartilage, the one that our vocal folds sit in, we can have it very, very vertical, boring, or aw, so adorable, or like this is all max tilt, right? All just from how we're producing that sound there. We can have a really heavy voice or a really thin voice. And then we take that sound that we make and we filter it through our instrument, this really exciting instrument, because when you think about a guitar or a violin, they're fixed in size and shape. They don't move, whereas the human instrument is constantly shifting and we have so much that we can do with it. So we take this sound that we've made and we amplify the parts of it we like. If we can have a big instrument if we want to have a nice dark deep sound, or we can have a really shallow instrument and have a very bright sound. Our larynx that our voice is coming out of can be high or low. Inside of our larynx above we have our false vocal folds, which can make our voice very constricted or be nice and open like a Disney princess voice. We can make our throat be really narrow. Rawr, I have a really narrow throat. Our nasal up high. But if we put them together, we end up with a really bright sound because we made it bright together. Our tongue can be in a really high position or a low position. We can spread our lips or have them purse. All of these things together just make our sound. The piece that I think is really important to know about this framework is window dressing. So there are a lot of things that work together to change our voice gender presentation. Those are the things that come from our power, our sound, and our filter. There are other things that are gendered in our society. Those are things like pitch, our intonation patterns, the melody pattern of our speech, how we emphasize words, what language we use. Do we say, would you kindly please sit in the chair, or hey, sit down? The accent. And if we make our sound and we shape it to sound like the gender presentation that our goal is, then we can use any window dressing we want and have people hear our voice as the gender that we are choosing to express. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you walking us through all that, and I'll just let folks listening know, especially to the podcast audience, that there is a copy of that graphic in the link that's already in the show notes for this episode. But I guess what I'm curious about then, if we have all of these different like levers and pulleys and all these different gears that we can shift back and forth between, and this complex recipe with all these different ratios and everything else, how do we develop that self-awareness? How do we begin to like recognize when we are trading our language or moving back and forth between these different types of voices?
So the best thing we can do is train our ears, right? No one can be as much of an expert on our voice as we can be on our own voice. And if we sound learning is very interesting because some people, it depends, but some people can just hear a sound and then without knowing any of the mechanisms be able to produce that same sound themselves. And even if you need a more breakdown, move things in this way type of approach, you still can learn to hear the sound changes in your own voice and complete the same movements to have those sounds come again. Sound is just so amazing, and we can become aware of our own sound and shift it.
So it's about a willingness, I suppose, to listen to ourselves and to like really pay attention to what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, technically, some people who have voice dysphoria don't like to listen to their own voice while they practice.
Sure.
So you can use earplugs and you can walk the sound and work on feeling. And there's exercises you can do initially that don't have any sound to them. But yeah, ultimately, voice is sound, and listening to the sound is how we start to learn what it is that we're doing in the process of working towards shifting it.
So, I mean, you mentioned some different exercises. I mean, obviously, working with a professional like yourself, what does the process look like to optimize all of these things and to maybe take more control over the way people hear us?
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to find someone to work with who's able to change their own voice gender presentation, because that's such a big part of having an effective and efficient voice gender presentation shift, is working with people who can do that. I think another piece that's really important for optimizing is having a community. There's been some research that's done that have shown when you compare people who do both individual voice training and work with groups, that they make more progress than people who only do individual voice training alone. In that spirit, I started a community on Facebook where people can come and work on their voice. We have a free monthly meetup where people from all over the world come and we learn and practice our voices together. And I really can see the people who have that community start to feel like it's not just me, other people are doing the work too, and there's hope.
Well, and I don't want to be too fake deep about it, but I mean, that feels like everything that we're talking about here, right? Like the importance of being able to take up space and to have a voice and to participate in a community. I mean, we're talking largely about people who may feel uncomfortable speaking up for themselves or who might feel uncomfortable sharing their voice with others. So creating a safe space to do that. I mean, again, I'd like to believe that we are working on creating a safe world for everybody to have a voice that is heard. But I also don't want to be Pollyanna-ish about it. The community that you're creating on Facebook feels incredibly vital. Are there other examples that you might be able to give us of people kind of coming together and circling the wagons in these ways to create a safe space?
Yeah, I think a lot of people come together, and I think that you don't have to be part of a big community in order to find supportive people. I think a lot of people I've worked with have liked just taking their voice. They're not comfortable yet using it with someone else. Send someone else a voice recording and get feedback that way. If you have people who you know who are supportive, even if they're not working on their own voice, then you can get their feedback. It's important to find people who are supportive and community. There's so many different places to connect, but I think finding other like-minded people is super important in this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that I have been on something of a personal journey myself this past year, looking to become a little bit more radically accepting, a little bit more self-aware, and to just be more mindful of the way that I speak and the way that I present myself to others. And, you know, I can definitely tell you that I have had relationships end and potentially jobs threatened and these different kinds of things because of a lack of that sort of self-awareness. What does it look like for people when these types of techniques or when this type of awareness is missing?
So I think that if you can't control the sound of your voice, then you are at the mercy of whatever it is that you're most used to doing, which might be lovely. But if it's not, then just sort of becoming aware that there's change that is possible is good. I know I have a friend who, she also worked in the nursing home, but Kara, who's absolutely lovely, and she always sounds like she is a preschool teacher, right? And everyone loves listening to her, but that same voice that's absolutely wonderful isn't always the best when you need someone to do something for you, right? And so being able to shift and just sort of be playing with your voice, learning how you can change it really opens up a lot of possibilities there.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we've been kind of talking around this question, but what do you see as far as our ability to make a more compassionate world, or to create like a safer, just a safer place for everybody to be able to express themselves and to, use their voice without all of the judgments about the way that it's, quote, supposed to be, or the way that people are supposed to sound?
I mean, if I had my choice, we would just stop gendering people all the time, right? Like Fiona called earlier and asked about misgendering. If people didn't say sure, she and her when we go to the fast food restaurant, then people wouldn't be getting misgendered, right? Like if we start, on our bank account, do we need to put Mrs. or Miss, or can we just put owner? If we see opportunities in our life where we are having gendered language, we can be critical. Is this something that I need to know, or is it not? In this, when I'm communicating, does it not matter what their gender is because I'm just serving them? And as we start to become more aware, I know there's the culture going on around it, but as we become more aware of gender, we can back up and only use gender language when it's relevant. Another thing that's really helpful for people to do is to use they. So it is grammatically correct to use they when you don't know someone's gender. And so if someone hasn't explicitly told you, there isn't a way to know what gender someone is. So we can just use they until they tell us.
Living in the South, just getting the sir and ma'am all the time. It's just, if I had a magic wand, I would get rid of those two words for sure.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair to say. And it kind of raises the question. I know that this is maybe an unfair thing to ask, but do either of you feel like we're headed in the right direction here? Certainly trans identities are more visible. In particular, we're seeing a lot more cultural acceptance around NB folks. And it feels like people are becoming more literate and more open-minded about these things. And then I turn on the news and I start to feel like really disheartened. I know that there's not necessarily a way to quantify these things, but do either of you feel like we are headed towards a society that is any more like open, accepting, or even just aware of these types of things?
I think that we are, as in so many things, trying to drag the world into a better place, and I'm seeing progress. I mean, at my workplace, they've got all the apps now have like she, her, he, him, etc., like that, and they're encouraging more inclusive language, etc., etc. Good things are happening there, but as you said, there's a lot of stuff going on, particularly in legislatures across the country and such, and in other countries, to try to put a halt to those things or to take things in a different direction entirely. So, it's like we're moving in the right direction, but at the same time, it's like we're dragging a heavy rock behind us that's occasionally pulling us backwards.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Sarah, you and I have been doing this show together for long enough to have seen, I think, a lot of success, but in ways that I can't necessarily quantify, and without any like real statistics or anything else, I can't help but admit feeling pretty goddamn tired a lot of the time.
Yeah. I'm tired a lot.
Fair to say. Well, with that very, very cheery tone, it might be a good time for a segue. So, Sarah, why don't you take us back to the phones and see if there's anybody who might be able to brighten our mood.
All right. We've got Stephanie from Maine. Stephanie, hello. How are you? And I hope you're having a great day.
I'm having a fabulous day. How are you?
Better now that you're here.
Okay, good. So I'm calling because it strikes me that back in the Stone Age, when I was a small child, well, not too small, but anyway, elocution was a subject that was actually taught in public schools. As there was a big emphasis on music and theater and that sort of thing. And I was struck earlier when you mentioned the Etonian training, and it seemed like that was a huge part of public education once upon a time, as to, whether it's society training you for a role in government or training you for a role on the stage, or there seemed to be at one point in time a little bit more awareness that presentation can either help or hurt what you have to say. And I just wondered if you guys would agree with that and have have any perspective on why we don't make such a big deal of it as we once did.
I'm very
Please go first.
I'm very interested in going back and finding the point in time in which we stopped including it as much focus in our education. I think that our culture in America sees that there should be this equality where everyone can head as far in the direction they want as they choose. And there's this independence that rather than, the society sets everything up to do things on our own. And part of how we do that was by this elocution and this teaching, so that everyone had the same verbal communication skills. And maybe part of how things got so separate, where the divide is so great, is because we don't have the same set of skills anymore. And if we included that again and more people had access to that some of that divide would start to shrink.
I agree. Can't say another. There's so many. I don't know at what point things shifted, but certainly in Hollywood, when the talkies came on, there was a development of what people would call the Mid-Atlantic dialect, which was sort of this. I don't even know if I can do it. Think Cary Grant, who's a Brit, right? But Cary Grant and Clark Gable sounded the same. They all talked like this. Or think Katharine Hepburn. There's another one. That people deliberately were trained to express themselves in a certain way. That go to not just for accent, but for intonation and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Well, if you want to be understood in the talkies, you have to speak in just the right way for the primitive technology. I don't know if that was any good at all. I apologize. We can delete that later. But yeah, I take your meaning. I don't know when or why we shifted away from these kinds of things. The answer that I would just sort of assume is true is that whatever the truth is, it's dumb. Because when I think about what is taught in our schools and where our curriculum is derived from, it is not a bunch of experts sitting around coming together and making intelligent, thoughtful conclusions. At least here in America, it is so often, as we're seeing kind of being worked out in the news right now, it is so often because of a bunch of angry people holding signs, or because of a bunch of rich politicians, or these things rarely seem to happen for the right reasons. And I guess I'm curious, then the question becomes, is there value in teaching elocution in schools, and what would that look like in a modern world? Tallulah, what would you I suppose recommend if you had the power to make some changes here?
I would remove Texas history from the curriculum and replace it with music and verbal communication, interpersonal communication skills. I think that I spent a lot of time learning Texas history in every grade, and that there's a space right there if we replace that with communication skills that would have valued me greatly.
I have another point that's sort of oh golly, I just lost it. So anyway, as an aside, I will admit to proudly having used the not proudly, but out of necessity, using the ladies' room, even in North Carolina for the past 23 years. So, those guys can pound sand.
Well, good on you. I mean, we appreciate you you helping to create space in that way. And I hate that you going to the bathroom is such a transgressive and radical act. But I do appreciate your willingness to do so.
Well, I just found it humorous when they passed that stuff. I mean, it was completely stupid. Anyway, thank you so much for taking my call. And I had a brilliant insight that I unfortunately was so brilliant it just burned out.
Yeah, shoot us an email, give us a call back. But thanks for being here tonight.
All right, ciao, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tallulah, before Serafina grabs us another call, I wanted to ask you about something that was raised in the chat, which is just around how elocution classes and these different things have often been really associated with a class divide. And I guess I'm curious what we should make of that now in 2021 as we talk about, access to private coaching and how insurance or things like Medicaid or Medicare do or probably in most cases don't step in here. I mean, what should we be thinking or feeling about the expense and the maybe social divide that we're discussing here?
Well, let me circle back around to a comment I had on something that came up a minute ago, which is about progress. So I think in some ways, progress is inevitable. It's just the rate at which it will happen. But in other ways, things want to stay the same, right? Whatever voice recipe we're using at the moment is the one that we'll continue using. This will be our voice until we do something intentional to change it. Change in society is the same way. If we want something to change, somebody has to do something to change it, because if no one does, then it'll stay the same. I think that we do have a lot of things going on with healthcare in America that access is a pretty big issue. I think there's a tie in the past to a racial divide, that our healthcare system was set up for unequal access. And one of the ways that that's affecting things now with having healthcare go through the workplace and various different things is that there isn't just this idea that healthcare is a right and that everyone should have it. And so you end up with these things like voice training that can make a huge difference in someone's life not being accessible. I know if you are more comfortable talking, then if that's going to give you access to these things just because you're willing to go there, that's step one. But there's a step, right? If you're able to be effective in the workplace, then you can move forward and become a manager and make higher pay. There's so many things that having these voice skills can help you get to, help you sort of live to your full potential, that I really think that everyone needs as much access as possible to the services, whether free or paid for by healthcare or personally, that will help them reach their voice goals to be able to have the life they want to live.
Yeah, so legitimate access to healthcare is once again the solution to the problem here. I mean, it feels like a broken record in a lot of ways, but I think that that's actually a really thoughtful and insightful answer, and hopefully something that we will see movement on, because like you said, it isn't just going to happen until we make changes. I'm still feeling very tired, Sarah. Yeah, let's take one more call if we can.
All right, Jenny in Texas. Hi, Jenny. How you doing?
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, what's on your mind
Good to
tonight?
see you.
So I wanted to ask Tallulah, what kind of playful voice games do you like? Impressions at the drive-thru, or funny cat voices, or other things?
Playful voice games. Okay. Well, I think voice play is fantastic in general, but I think that playing with our voices is really fun. So, right, like we can talk in a really, really tiny voice and then just keep getting bigger and bigger until our voice just is right. Like we're having a really, really big instrument until like we're as big as we can possibly be. So that's fun, kind of shifting between different ways that we can move our voice. I think it's fun to try and helpful, not just fun, but I think it's fun to try to make things shift without other things shift. So our voice recipes also have friends. So when we have our larynx sitting in a high position, we want to use a high pitch and we want to have a thin voice. So if we can separate those out and maybe only have one variable shift, that can be fun and hard and good for control. But yeah, I think role play is fun. I am intending at some point to go to the gas station, not the gas station, the coffee drive-thru and order coffee using a masculine voice, but I haven't worked up the nerve yet, but soon, because I think I can get gendered as he with a masculine voice, right? But yeah, so Jenny, answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for calling.
Yeah, have a great night.
We appreciate it.
Well, then, Tallulah, that kind of raises the question whether we are playing games or working with a coach or whatever else. What ideas would you suggest to people who are watching tonight that want to, I guess, maybe take a little bit more ownership of the way that they present or their persona and their voice in these ways?
So the first thing is to make sure that you have a healthy voice, that you're taking care of it. And then I'd start thinking about what you want for your voice. Start being aware of where your voice is now. There's a lot of free resources on the internet. If those are complicated or not working, you need a little external motivation. There's voice coaches. Finding someone who can change their own voice gender presentation is super helpful for that process. I think that community is incredibly important. Reaching out and finding people who are able to have a shared experience and be supportive is really important. So I think all of that, just finding community, having a healthy voice. I do have just like a sort of, if your voice is strained, then take a break. But in general, right, if we aren't having pain or strain, our voice likes to be used. So we can always do humming and different small sounds where our mouth is small, or ahs with a straw. With the straws in our mouth, different things to make our voice be happy because our voice wants to be used. Yeah, and not whispering when we're sick, just either not use our voice or use it at full volume. That also helps.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any exercises or tips or tricks or even just silly games that you'd like to recommend to us here? I mean, working with a straw or anything else that might come to mind?
So I have something that I think would be helpful for everyone, whether or not they're working on their voice gender presentation. So especially when we're anxious, we have a tendency to make our voice constrict. So there's our true vocal folds that vibrate, and then on top of them there are false vocal folds that only really vibrate in throat singing, which is not something I can do. But we can make a sound, ah, find the point where that sound is made from. It's about the middle. And then we can silently go back and forth between pretending to grunt and preparing to laugh. And we'll feel a movement happen right above our finger, and that's our false vocal folds opening and closing. And if we go into that position that we're about to laugh and keep that open feeling, then if we yell, we're not going to hurt our voice because we're not pushing air past our false vocal folds. Our voice sounds clean and clear. we don't necessarily sound so anxious if our voice is open. And, like royalty has a tendency to always have their false vocal folds retracted as a sort of voice recipe that it tends to get used. If we want to check whether or not our false vocal folds are retracted, we can try to make an H sound. If we breathe and we hear our breath, our false vocal folds are in the way, but we can breathe at the same rate in and out and not hear our breath. And that means they're parted, retracted. And if we can make an H sound, they're not retracted, they're in the way. So that's a test for whether or not we've retracted them. But just retracting your false vocal folds out of the way lets you have a clean, clear voice. If you're a teacher, you're having to use your voice a lot, a speech language pathologist, having to yell at students, like all of that, just being able to not have them in the way helps a lot with vocal health.
Yeah, I honestly feel like I'm going to need to go back and watch that part of the video, to get a sense of how to actually go through the motions as you were describing them, but then also, and again, for the podcast audience who may want to check this out, to just see your face expressions as you go through fake grunting and fake laughing is just remarkable. I cannot stop geeking out at just how amazing our ability to communicate is. As human beings, as great apes, as mammals, we have this remarkable ability to communicate and to coordinate and to express emotions and information back and forth. It's why we're the dominant species on this planet, but it's also just incredible the way that we have evolved these incredibly sophisticated and unique and diverse bodies, and to recognize in myself like a sincere lack of ability to really like manipulate and utilize these tools. It's just amazing seeing a professional like yourself who's able to navigate and utilize their bodies in ways that are honestly really foreign.
You can learn. Everyone can learn. I do, if people are going to listen back, I do just want to model the 3 different positions, right? So my false vocal folds are really constricted. I sound like I'm lifting a heavy box or I'm pooping. This is the voice that we make when we're constricted. In a mid position, which is how I normally talk, there's a little bit of an edge there. You can kind of hear that it's not a totally smooth tube the sound is passing through. Or I can be in a retracted position where my vocal folds moved out of the way and it's a smooth path. I just wanted to show that so we know what we're talking about. But there's so many exercises like that and different pieces and parts, and you should learn because we all can. And playing with our voices is a lot of fun.
Yeah, no question. Do you have any recommendations for just kind of daily life? For when you want to like sit down and practice, that's one thing. But is there anything in particular that you might recommend for folks who are wanting to be more mindful and more intentional in sort of their day-to-day speech and conversation?
So I do a vocal warm-up myself, and I find that my clients who do them as well tend to be able to get started with their preferred voice recipe more easily. A really easy way to do a vocal warm-up is to do some like, ah, whoa, and then small sounds, sounds where the sound is flowing and your mouth has a little opening, zzz, ing, like walking, ing, and then the middle sound and measure, zh, and going through a few rounds of those in the morning, right? Our voices want to be used, and then your voice will be ready for the day and happy to be working for you and sounding good and clear.
So is it important then to warm our voices up in the morning or to start the day off in any particular way? Do you have any thoughts or tips on how to not just, I guess, avoid damaging our voice, but to like stretch it out and to work it out and to put it to work?
I mean, we're literally talking about muscles here, right? I think hydration is also super important. That should not be left out for sure. But yeah, I do think highly approve. I do think that that using a vocal warm up in the morning before we get started is really good. And also just being aware, if we feel like there's a very significant difference between how our voice sounds when we get out of bed and how it does half an hour later, then we should really take a look at how our throat feels. And if there's any discomfort, talk to our doctor about it, because we might have something going on, like having acid come up in the middle of the night and irritating our vocal folds. But yeah, vocal health is very important. If we want our voice to work for us, we have to help it along. But vocal warm-ups are super good. And you can also do a vocal warm-up after you've used your voice. People will come in and say, oh, I had a really hard voice day. And we do those same exercises I just modeled a minute ago, maybe a little bit more times, but the same thing. And then they'll say that their voice is feeling better. I can show you a straw one. This is a really good restorative one. But if we have an ah, just up with the straw in the mouth. Or down. We're using our vocal folds and it makes them happy. A few of those will make our voice feel better. Our voice wants to be used.
Use it or lose it. I actually really like that idea, because I do find, at least as an outsider, that is maybe a very pervasive myth, that that you need to not just rest your voice, but maybe like avoid using it, and that, you know, there's almost this idea that if you use it too much, you might break it or whatever else. And you know, folks who have been listening to the show when Dr. Ray is on will definitely recognize the idea that any of your muscles that you want to use should probably be used, that you're not going to run out of orgasms or anything else, that these muscles are part of your body and that they're meant to be exercised.
Yeah. Side note into speech therapy, but something that happened a lot when I was in the nursing homes is that there would be very active elderly adults, 80s, 90s year old, living independently, and then they would fall and break their hip. And when you have a hip fracture, you have to stay in bed for 3 weeks, and their muscles would get so weak during those 3 weeks that they had been able to clear their lungs of anything that went down the wrong way. They had dysphagia, a swallowing problem before, but then when they're in bed, they're no longer having the strength, and they end up getting pneumonia from this dysphagia they never knew they had, because they were always up and breathing deeply, which clears our lungs and makes them happy. And so, yeah, I totally like the idea of use your muscles.
Bodies are weird. Well, you've mentioned some of these different communities and things. Are there any other resources that folks watching should go and check out? Any podcasts or websites, YouTube videos, or anything else that you would like to shout out or recommend to folks?
I do. I just started adding videos to my YouTube channel, and I will continue putting up more. I have some talks about gender voice I've put up there. The Facebook community is free. I have 2. I have one that is for people who want to change their own voice gender presentation, and then I have another that's for people who are helping others. Gender voice is an extremely fast moving field, and you can't really check out and stay up to date on the techniques. We just aren't established with what the best way to do it is yet. So it's a free space. We have meetings every other Thursday for SLPs and voice coaches to come to learn skills, because right, like if it's hard to work on your voice as it is, we should all be doing it as effectively and efficiently as we can, whether we're doing it ourselves or for others. I have a blog, and I have an extremely detailed resource list on the blog that is Texas centric, but it's any sort of resource that would be relevant to people who are gender diverse is on there. There's it's long, but I do keep that up to date as well.
Okay, well, great. And we definitely have links to that sort of thing in the show notes for the episode. And here in just a moment, I'm going to let Serafina kind of walk us through some of those links and just walk us out for the evening. But before she does, did you have any last words or any final thoughts that you wanted to leave with the audience tonight?
I really want people to know that it is possible to change your voice, that it takes work, but it is absolutely possible. There's no need to do surgery. There's no need to sort of sit in a voice that doesn't express yourself. If sometimes you might need help, sometimes you can do it on your own, but you absolutely can change your voice.
That's so great. Can we share Tallulah's links with the audience who is watching us today? We've got harmonicspeech.com or facebook.com/group/gendervoice, facebook.com/harmonicspeech, instagram.com/harmonicspeech, and twitter.com/harmonicspeech. You're everywhere, Tallulah.
I try.
Oh, that's wonderful. For those who want to see more of our productions, you can always go to tiny.cc/AEN podcasts. And if you want to continue the conversation, talk to some of the co-hosts or hosts. We've got the Facebook I cannot talk today, so I need some voice training myself. The Facebook Secular Sexuality fan group, fan run. And there's always the ACA Discord at tiny.cc/ACA Discord. As always, we want to thank our wonderful, amazing crew who works so hard to put all of this stuff together. Crew Cam, hey.
Hey, thank you so much, everybody. All the folks without a voice, but that make us sound so good.
They're so fantastic.
Well, fun episode. I feel like this is really important stuff, and honestly stuff that is worth kind of going back over. I think this will be one of the episodes I kind of dragged that scroll bar across a couple of times as we try out some of these things. But regardless of if this is your first time listening to or watching this clip, or if you've come to it 10 times now, I might encourage everybody listening to the sound of my voice to take a quiet moment to themselves and give themselves a big old orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.